Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's masterclass with Rachel McDermott. I'm going to start with a couple of announcements, and then I'll do our usual routine of introducing my beloved colleague, Rachel McDermott. I just want to, one of the first announcement is that there are now or are about to be recordings of our first two master classes so far by Professor Kaviraj and Professor Chatterjee. These recordings are now online through YouTube with a link that you can access through our website. I don't know if they're actually there yet, but that's something we've been getting into the works over the last few days.
They are already online.
What?
They are online now.
Okay, so they're now available.
Yeah.
And they are accessible through YouTube rather than just something available on our website, because our website needs updating and we can't do videos on our website yet. But hopefully that will change in the before the end of the year anyway. The other thing I want to announce is that out of modesty, I guess, I had not put myself up for a master class and instead was planning to just do my class as a smaller one for the people who are actually registered for my course. But I sort of realized that that's probably self-defeating, and also I'm sure my publisher, Columbia University Press, would prefer that I make things a little more public. So I've decided that I will do the master class on October 30th, which is the week I was planning to speak anyway. So you'll all get some kind of notice about that as well, and readings, relevant readings will be posted. So I'd love to have you join us for on Friday, usual time, Friday, October 30th. I'm getting a lot of sound from somewhere. Does anybody know about that static?
Somebody may need to mute their phone or their sound.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so I'll give Rachel a brief introduction, and then we'll look forward to hearing her. Professor McDermott is a professor of Asian and Middle Eastern cultures at Barnard, and a member of the graduate faculty in Columbia's religion department. She has a Ph.D. from Harvard. And in addition to being a tireless, dedicated teacher, mentor, and administrator, and I'm not just saying that, I mean, she is over the top in all of these things, and beloved by her students and colleagues, and I see some acknowledgements in the crowd. And she is also an important and well-known expert on the Hindu goddess-centered religious traditions in Bengal. So her research interests focus in Bengal, and she's a rare scholar who has done research in both India and Bangladesh. And I know some of my students have sort of mentioned complained, not to me, I mean, not about this course or anything, but just complained generally that the scholarship on is heavily focused on India, and places like Bangladesh just don't get enough visibility. So I think this work that we'll talk about in a minute is very important along these lines. So having published extensively on the goddess traditions, she's moved in recent years to this very different project that actually crosses it's not just moving to Bangladesh, she's actually crossing the border between the two countries. I'll just say a few things about some of her publications, her books. I believe her, and I'm gleaning this stuff from my own research. So Rachel, if I get something wrong, please correct me. It's not like we did this in an interview. So what I think is one of her first two books, which seem to have come out right around the same time in 2001, Mother of My Heart, Daughter of My Dreams, is on the Shakta literature in Bengal, looking at Kali Bhakti by tracing its history through critical readings of goddess texts, exploring the interface of this textual tradition with the Vaishnava literary traditions that preceded it in Bengal, bringing together the study of history and popular culture. She mapped the changes in the iconography of the goddess as it is portrayed in the songs covering the period from the mid-19th century, when this form first appeared, to the present. And then Singing to the Goddess, which was published also by Oxford, I think, in 2001, as a companion volume, is an anthology of Shakta devotional poems that Rachel translated from Bangla. These poems span 250 years and depict various aspects of the goddess. And then we have Revelry, Rivalry, and Longing for the Goddesses of Bengal, The Fortunes of Hindu Festivals, which was published in 2011. This book presents a historical account of Bengal's three major annual festivals dedicated to the goddesses Durga, Kali, and Jagadhatri. With meticulous detail, she presents the panorama of these festivals that really takes over, and I've actually seen this, that take over Kolkata and fill city streets for days, tracing their origins in local practices and rivalries of the landed gentry, their growth through the colonial period, and their current importance for Kolkata's middle class. Her work has also followed Hindus and Christians across the ocean, from India to the US. And I'll just mention here something which you hopefully have read, her 2009 book chapter, From Hinduism to Christianity, From India to New York, Bondage and Exodus Experiences in the Lives of Indian Dalit Christians in the American Diaspora. She also has numerous journal articles and chapters in edited volumes, including the managing editorship of volume 2 of The Sources of Indian Traditions for the 3rd edition, which was published in 2014. And then she is now involved in the research project that I hinted at on Kazi Nazrul Islam, who is both the rebel poet of India and the national poet of Bangladesh. And I have no doubt that we'll hear about him today, so I won't say anything more about that right now. So please join me in welcoming Rachel McDermott, and we look forward to your masterclass. Oh, you're on mute.
It's lovely to be with you, and I feel I've been in this class now for 3 or 4 weeks, so nice to see many of you again. It's hard to know where to start, and I don't want to start at the beginning, so I'll start in graduate school. When I was in the position of many of you, I went to Harvard, and my dissertation advisor was a specialist in Bhakti literature from the South. But I had come to graduate school with a pre-existing interest in Bengal, and started learning Bengali only in graduate school. And decided that I wanted to study the Bengali goddess-centered traditions of India. And so took 2 years in India for my dissertation research. The first one was a mad attempt to catch up on Bengali. And the second one, I was reading this Bengali poetry with a number of experts. And I should tell those of you who are doing dissertation work or planning to do dissertation work that it took me many years to finish really what I started. I did finish my dissertation, graduated. I did 2 years of research in India and then took 2 years to write. But what I actually published, those 2 volumes that Kathy spoke about, didn't come out for another 8 years. And the reason for that is that you may write an okay dissertation, but you don't want that to be the coffee table book that sits there looking at you for the rest of your life and after you're dead. So it took me a long time to go back and do additional research, translate more poetry, do more field work, which I did while teaching at Barnard, and finally came out with these 2 books. They represent sort of a study of the goddess-centered bhakti devotional tradition on Kali and Durga and Uma. And I always tell people who have just graduated not to publish their book instantly if they don't feel that it's in the state they want it to be going forward, because then you'll always regret it. Why didn't I take that time to fix that chapter or something? But anyway, so I feel I learned a lot. I love the bhakti poetry. I spent a lot of time in Kali temples talking to people about this poetry. It's very difficult to translate poetry when you're not a poet. And also when you don't speak the language as a primary language, a mother tongue. So every single poem in that anthology and in any work that I published, I've gone over it multiple times with scholars in India to correct the grammar or to make sure I've understood the right connotations, which is why translating is so difficult, but so rewarding, I find. But then I decided, you have to find a second project to go on in life. And I decided that the second project would be the festivals to the goddess that I had encountered in Calcutta, but not been focusing on. And almost the moment I got to India for my dissertation research, so I got there in October of 1988. And in November of 1988, there was Kali Puja, which is the big annual festival to Kali. And so my husband and I decided we would go to, it turned out to be the 3rd most important Kali temple in the city in Calcutta, or Kolkata. Then it was Calcutta. And we watched 108 goats being ritually blessed. And I was so upset that I couldn't watch them being killed. And we went home, and I remember in those days, the only way to get in touch with your advisor was to write one of those ancient blue air letters. There was no email, there were no phones, and the phones didn't work. And I remember, I didn't actually write the letter, but I remember thinking that I would write, "Dear Dr. Carmen, I have taken the wrong subject. I must return." I was so horrified that I was planning to study this goddess. And so I made a decision then in 1988 in November, never to go back to a Kali temple at any festival time when there was going to be animal sacrifice. And I said, okay, I'm just going to focus on the bhakti poetry, which has nothing to do with animal sacrifice. And that's what I did, basically, for the next 8 or 9 years. But then after these books were more or less finished, I decided that I really needed to confront the fear, and that if I really wanted to understand anything about who Kali was, I needed to study her festival and her ritual. It's one thing to study the literature. The bhakti literature is very sweet and very cerebral in a way and heart-centered. But if you really want to understand the cult in the sense of the ritual of a god or goddess, you have to go and spend time at temples. So then I started forcing myself to watch blood sacrifice, and that is the beginning of this second book, the Revelry, Rivalry book, which has a lot about ritual, but then it expanded to include iconography and the colonial background, the history of the temple, also the gorgeous pandals, this temporary temple structures that go up. And that's how this book came along. And I feel really happy that I engaged in this because I feel that I understand the goddess cult so much better now, or the goddess tradition. I still don't like to watch animal sacrifice. I really don't like it. But I think up to myself what a hypocrite I am because I eat meat here in this country. And I often think that I should become a vegetarian. And then I think, no, if you're going to study the goddess, you can't be lily-livered. You've got to be a good Shakta. You've got to, you know, face blood. That's what she encourages. So I haven't yet become a vegetarian. I'd like to show you some pictures of this second major project. And then I'll tell you about the next projects. But so let me screen share here. And let me do, hold on a second. I'm going to try to, can you see this? Yeah, can you see it? Yeah, okay. Whoops, sorry. So I just have a few slides of all the work that I did in meeting countless singers and reciters of the poetry that became the center of the first two books. But I spent months interviewing people and listening to people. I would say, sing for me your favorite hymn to Kali or something, and people would sing for me. There was a special group, still exists in Calcutta. They dress up as sadhus. These are actually householders, but they dress up as sadhus and they sing the most gorgeous bhakti hymns to the goddess. So this was just an example. But while I was in Calcutta doing all this work, this is the most famous of the Kali temples in Calcutta, the Kalighat Temple. Very small temple, actually, given its reputation and given what temples look like elsewhere in India. But here is a line for darshan. And this is the Kali of Kalighat. She has this long tongue, and the arms and legs are barely visible, but you can see the primary colors, the third eye. Then this is the second most famous Kali temple. This is the Dakshineshwar Kali Mandir that has the image in it that Ramakrishna, the famous Bengali saint who died in 1886. This is his Kali worshipped here, and here is the long line for darshan. And this is the Kali of Dakshineshwar. Again, you can see the black face, red, the primary colors. And now you can see the arms coming out. This is the Kali of the Siddheshwari Kali temple. These are just various temples in the city, just so you can see what Kali looks like if you were to go to the city. This is another Kali, the Tantaniya Kalibari. This is a small Anandamoyi Kali in the southern part of the city. This is a Kali in the north that belongs to a particular family, Guhader Kali. This is a Kali in Krishnanagar, another Siddheshwari Kali. This is a Kali in Navadvip in north of Calcutta, the city of Chaitanya, Bhavatarini Kali, big, big eyes. These are pictures from books, unfortunately, but this is one of the most skeletal Kalis I've ever seen. I apologize for the bad photography. And this one also. These are in the Hooghly district. But you can see that Kali's iconography is of her holding a head and a cleaver with her left hands, and or they're right to us, but her left. And then the blood is dripping and the jackals are drinking the blood. And so then I also began for this second book, although many of these pictures were taken while I was working on the first book, so the projects meld together. But I began to go and visit the place where the yearly images of Kali are made for the puja. So every puja, every year, the festival in November or October is held, and images of the goddesses are made and put out in little pandals or temporary temples and worshipped for 2 or 3 days and then immersed in the Ganga or the Hooghly River. So you can see here the old style Kali, which reflects the images that I just showed you, the real images of the temples. And then a newer style Kali who is more anthropomorphized, that is, she looks more like a real woman, and slightly lighter color, blue color. So I watched how these images are made with bamboo and straw, and this is how they take the water out of the clay. And here is an old style Kali's face being made, and then the tongue and the teeth are attached and the crown. And you can see that her eyes are said to be bloodshot because she's angry, either that or she's inebriated, one or the other. And here are such Kalis drying in the workshops of the sculptors. And then when one is finished, it looks like this. So they add polish and lots of clothes, and these are worshipped in people's houses. And you can see the rongoli here on the floor and all of the accoutrement with the priest doing the worship. Here are some other examples. And one of the things I did in the book was to devote a chapter to the iconographic, I'm just going to admit, the iconographic depictions of both Durga and Kali. So here is the Kali of Kalighat, made as a temporary image. This is not quite in focus, I'm sorry. This is again from Krishnanagar. It's one of the few images I've ever seen where Kali is seated and seated on Krishna. On Shiva. In the Tantras, she's said to be having reverse sexual intercourse with Shiva, which is very difficult to imagine if she's standing up. So the actual Tantras say that he ought to be parallel to her, not perpendicular to her, but at least in this image, you can see her seated. This was an image in, I think, 1998 that was made by a sculptor, but it was so ugly that nobody would worship it. And in fact, a tantric priest came along and said that if you were to worship this Kali, you would have to do it with human sacrifice. So she was immersed without having been enlivened. These are just a couple of the calendar art depictions, what I call the older style. You can see this is a Ravi Varma image of Kali. This is not Ravi Varma, but it's in that same sort of style of the horrific. Now in the Potter's districts, I wanted to show you also the other type of Kali that has become popular since the mid-20th century. This is a Kali with shorter tongue, more natural eyes, lighter skin. She has mascara. Sometimes she has a beauty spot. My friend David Kinsley once said to me that Kali's tongue is getting shorter and her breasts are getting bigger.
Rachel, can I ask you, since you're talking about that right now, do you have a sense of why this is happening?
Yes, it happened first to Durga. It happened in the 1920s to Durga, and then it caught on. Partly it happened because the artists, some of the famous ones, were influenced by Western styles of authentic anthropomorphic depiction. Mm-hmm. And that caught on. And many of the artisans claimed that, in fact, they should be depicting Kali looking more natural because that would be the best way to convey the stories of the Tantras and the Puranas. rather than these static images where the goddess just stands and is not engaged in movement. But of course, the static images really are actually more authentic to the Tantras, because the Tantras are talking about meditating on Kali in the heart. And so you need a static image, not an image in movement. I think also it just had to do with evolving standards of beauty and of experimentation, and also of the criticism of non-Shaktas to these very horrific looking, or could be horrific looking images of the goddess.
Yeah, I wonder if there's also some kind of shift in an understanding of what worship is.
Well, as these pujas become highly democratized, they started off as something in the homes of the wealthy, and then they slowly began to fill the streets. And as you fill the streets, you need things that will, they become popularized. And so the public demands experimentation, they demand beauty. Also, there was a parallelism made between these images and movie stars, and the beauty of somebody, I want the goddess to look like my mother or my, so there was an attempt to bring the goddess really into the mainstream. Those who worship the older styles of goddess, however, would complain that they were the ones that really had, the goddess is supposed to be inspiring awe or even fear, and these goddesses don't do that. Anyway, I'm just showing you a few more pictures. This one has gone so far that Shiva's not lying down anymore. He's sitting up looking at her. But, she becomes very sexy, goddess. And she becomes married in a way that the older goddesses might not have been. So this is the conch shell of the married woman. And she's got the nose ring of the married woman. So in a way, she's domesticated by these newer images. And then this is some calendar art depictions that mirror such new conceptions of Kali. Now, these are some of the earliest images. These are taken from newspaper microfilms in the old way. These were some of the earliest ones that occurred in the 40s of Kali. The book that, if you were able to do the reading, if you read the introduction to the Puja book, it really is a book that is, however, taken over by Durga, because Durga is the more popular of the goddesses of Bengal in terms of, in terms of the puja. The puja takes 9 or 10 days every fall, and in a contrast to Kali's 3 days. And this is Durga here, and she has two, the Lakshmi and Saraswati are considered to be her daughters in Bengal, and Ganesha and Kartikeya, her sons. And here she is killing the demon, the Mahisha, the demon, riding on her horse. And this image is seen all throughout Calcutta. And this was the one, this is the first real artisan who, in the 1920s, who began to free Durga from the static. You can see this is the old style image. Everybody is in one background, and they're just standing. You don't see that much movement except for the horse. But here you can see that she's actually, he used to get models, human models, so he could understand what it would be like for the demon actually to be trying to spear the lion, etc. These are all pictures from the 20s. And so the backdrop was removed, the two daughters were moved off, and these artisans would go to the zoo, for instance, and make sure they understood what the physiognomy of a buffalo would be, or a lion. Then I began for this second book to go and talk to families who were worshiping the goddess during the puja time. I attended rituals. This is the kolabo, the banana plant that is installed next to the Durga icons, washed in the river and brought in. This is a picture of a blue bird who is freed by families who can afford it, right before she is taken at the end of the festival to be immersed in the river. And the bird is supposed to fly back to Shiva in Kailasa in the Himalaya mountains and let him know that his wife is on her way back. It's a beloved ritual. Here is the Kumari Puja, when a little girl is worshipped on the 9th day as an embodiment of the goddess. Here are the rituals of the last day of the puja, when women bring out sweets and they put them in the mouth of the goddess. They put cinder on her head. They put cinder on each other as a way of wishing her goodbye when she leaves. I also wrote a whole chapter on the daughter tradition, because the goddess is also said to be Uma, the wife of Shiva, the daughter, the beautiful young girl who comes home with her son Ganesha to her parents, who have longed for her for the whole year. Because one peculiarity of Bengal is that there are no permanent Durga temples. There are lots and lots of Kali temples, but not a single Durga temple. So the only time you get to see Durga is when she comes home once a year. And the story is that her parents pine for her. And here come, I think these are the two daughters coming on swans. And this seems to be Shiva. Mostly he doesn't come, he stays at home and waiting for her, but he's a derelict vagabond of a husband in these stories. And then I spent a whole chapter of this second book attending pujas year after year. I must have attended 10 or 12 of them in India, and then I started attending them in the United States. And people go at night to visit the various goddesses. And it's really like a carnival. There are balloons and coffee stores and little stalls selling ice cream. And it's really like this. You can be swept away by the crowds. And I also spent a lot of time taking pictures of pandals. This is made out of, it's a temporary structure made out of bamboo and cloth and all sorts of other decorations. And it is from 1995, I believe, when the Titanic movie came out. This is the Titanic in Salt Lake in Calcutta, and inside is a goddess. And here is the Church of Notre Dame in Paris. So the goddess gets in everything. There's so much creativity. Here's Jurassic Park. If you go underneath this guy, you'll find a little temple, temporary temple that has Durga in it. Here is 9/11. This is a lighting show in which the airplane crashes into the Twin Towers. And here is the buffalo demon in the shape of Osama bin Laden. This picture was taken right before the police forced the sculptor to crash it down, because they didn't want to cause communal problems between Muslims and Hindus. Here is the Tata car. This is a whole pandal just built, and you go inside and there's Durga. It's incredible. This was reflecting the leave taking of Tata Motors from Bengal due to labor disputes and communal problems. And then we get to the animal sacrifice part. I have a whole chapter in that book on sacrifice and on the controversies surrounding sacrifice. This is at the back of the Kalighat Temple. These are the stakes. Here, the animal's head is put in between, and then a cleaver comes. And this is an animal sacrifice that occurs in a house. I'm a fairly wealthy landed family in Bengal, in Calcutta, and they have a goat who is garlanded and blessed, and then the goat is cut, and the blood is offered to the goddess, and then the meat is taken and either eaten by the family if they eat meat once a year, or given to the poor. And the heads are placed before the goddess. And this is not a picture I took, but it is a buffalo sacrifice. I really couldn't watch this. It takes a lot of effort to kill a buffalo. And here are people putting their heads after the sacrifice is over on the stake, which has been garlanded, and taking some of the blood, if there is any left, and putting it on their own foreheads as a sign of reverence for the goddess. This was a goddess whom I went to see up in North Calcutta on a Kali Puja night that I will never forget. I was absolutely terrified. There were goats all around. You can't see it all around here. When I mean terrified, I don't mean for my safety. I just mean that the feelings that this engendered in me were so many people, including women and children, had staked out places, almost the way you might at a picnic, to be near the stake when the animals were killed. And I found this extremely difficult. Here is a sacrifice of brown sugar, molasses, for the vegetarians, because the goddess likes sacrifice. So if you can't do or won't do an animal, you can at least sacrifice something different, something vegetarian. And here is a measly, but interesting, small agitation against animal sacrifice. Amra branchte chai. Amader boli diona. We would like to live. Please don't give us a sacrifice. But this group was stationed outside of the Kalighat Temple, and they weren't allowed in. The police kept them out because of the lobby of and the power of the Kalighat priests. So all of this work on Kali gave birth to an edited volume on Kali, and this is the first book on the songs that Kathy told you about, and another edited book, and then this book from which you read the introduction on the festivals. So let me just stop there for a minute. I don't know, maybe if anybody has any questions on this before I go on to the other two things I wanted to talk about.
I know I do, but I want to give other people a chance to ask some questions first, if you have them.
Yes.
Hi, Professor. One of the pictures which you were showing in the slideshow had these people whom you said were a part of the family dressed up as saints. They had quite some resemblance to the people who perform ball in Bengal. Were they similar? Were they the same? Was it the same thing?
You mean who are, you mean bowels? Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. People who perform.
Yes, so the people who were dressed up as saints, whom you said were, were a part of the family, I was a little curious if they were into the ball movement, or
They are. They're from Andul, which is in south of Calcutta. They're called the Andul Kalikirtan Shomiti. They are not bowels, but they are. They only sing the songs to Kali composed by this man, Nath Bhattacharyya.
Okay.
So, but he died in the early 20th century. And it's partly their descendants and partly others whose, so there's no real resemblance, but in the sense that they go around as a group, but there are no women involved in their singing.
All right.
But yeah, it's haunting music.
All right.
Rachel, I had a question for you as well. So I'm fascinated by like the different priorities or the different investments of the people who are making these pandals now. In 1998, we see a really fearsome Kali who's too scary to be worshipped. And then we get this sort of, on the one hand, a sort of domestication or a beautification process of Kali, and on the other hand, all of this sort of social commentary in the form of the architecture of the bundles themselves. Is there any sort of like distinct pattern that you can identify in how the sort of bundle making traditions are just changing? Is this like a pronounced difference between like the Kali versus the Durga pujas, or is there any, what can you say about like these changing patterns?
I can say several things quickly. One of them is that the pandals like this really only began in the 70s. They have become more and more ornate. People, the reason the book is called Revelry and Rivalry is because so many different neighborhood associations band together to create a pandal, and they keep it secret. And then there's an explosion of pandals, and people, there are prizes given for the best ones, the most creative ones. And now, since I finished this book, it was just beginning in 2010. There's now the theme puja, where the Titanic one, Durga was just inside a Titanic. But if you were a theme puja now, she would be wearing, whatever the clothes were that 19th century people would have worn who got on the Titanic. You know what I mean? The whole thing would have been unified. So that's a big change. Durga Puja always leads Kali Puja. So the most spectacular creativity is always given to Durga Puja. And the reason for that is that Kali is still viewed as a somewhat difficult goddess to worship. If you make a mistake, you're much more afraid of her than you would be for Durga. But now everything is so very commercialized. Neighborhood associations will pay thousands, the equivalent of thousands of dollars to secure the services of some artisan who is known for having won prizes in the past, or they will send people, say, to, I don't know, Leningrad to get a particular church and to take pictures of it, or to go look at the Parliament building in London, or to try to do something nobody's done before and to do it on a bigger and greater scale. Critics of this will say, well, where's Durga in all of this? That all people care about is prestige.
Can we perhaps see a kind of a neoliberal influence in the turn to
of course,
prestige with global networks and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, Rachel. I know you're trying to move this, moving along, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the 9/11.
Oh yeah.
There may not be anything terribly interesting to say about it, but I have to ask. Could you say a little bit more about that temple and how people were reacting to it? I even think that the communal component of killing Osama bin Laden kind of reacting is kind of fascinating. But
there was an uptick in communal agitation in Calcutta, of course, after 9/11. And so because at the time, 9/11 was during the communist state rule there. They were very, very particular that they didn't want any communal upset. So you saw the picture of the airplane. That was actually not a temple, but it was the lighting shows, because behind all of these pandals and around them are these elaborate lighting shows that are put up by engineers. And so you could actually see the onward flight of the airplane. And that was dismantled. Everything was dismantled that would have given people cause to have violence of any sort. 25% of West Bengal is Muslim, and the vote matters a lot. And also Bengal, I think now the BJP has gained a foothold in West Bengal. I used to think it would never happen, but it is happening now.
So one of the, Fran, go ahead.
I was fascinated by your point that Durga is the patron goddess, the most popular in Calcutta, and there's not one single temple to her. So what do people do when they can't have access to the fancy festivals? I mean, I suppose middle-class people have private little shrines, or are there little niche shrines like there are in many cities for sort of a tiny little installation of the goddess? Or don't they kind of miss her if they can't see her very much?
Yes, and that's why the festival is so important. She's the daughter, she's coming home. Kali is the mother who stays with us all the time. You can find little niche temples to Kali everywhere, images of Kali everywhere. But Durga, she really is the demon slaying daughter, and the poetry will say, what is this? You're the daughter and you've all dressed up. You've come home in a demon slayer's clothes. What is this? We want you to come home as our darling daughter. So there's this, there are very few images of Durga that we would see publicly year round. But it's, if you need the power of the goddess, you pray to Kali. I know it doesn't sound intuitively right, but I've looked for I've looked for temples. There are very few, almost no temples. Which is
so one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody else wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to go for like a little bit. It's much less of a question. I'm a native from Kolkata, so, and I'm also an anthropologist, so I just kind of figured out that the discomfort of being a native probably never goes away. Because you called Goddess Kali sexy, and it's kind of it didn't fill me with rage, but it was definitely interesting to me. And most of the questions that I wanted to ask probably have been asked. And you did say just now that Durga is probably not summoned as much, but I've seen a lot of my family members and myself quickly in a moment of where we're troubled or where we want the goddess to be in our lives, saying Duga Duga.
Yes.
Which basically means,
yes.
Yeah, we're summoning Durga quickly. So yeah, I just wanted to place my discomfort right there. And I also wanted to say that I completely understand at the same time, because I'm also an anthropologist.
Durga, Durga, yes.
Yes.
You say it before you go on any trip or anything. She's very
Yes.
much a part of the life. The only reason I said sexy is just because she's been, I mean, that picture I showed you, she had almost nothing covering her pubic area. And that's usually not, you never see that in a permanent Kali temple. But you know, she has become younger, more lithe and beautiful over time, at least in the temporary images. Anyway,
in some ways, would you say that the face of Kali is starting to resemble the face of Durga, the anthropomorphized Durga as well?
Yes, the same process is happening to both of them, and it's happening to Jagadhatri. I have a chapter in the book on Jagadhatri as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor.
But it hasn't happened to Chamunda or goddesses that are really very, Chamunda is never beautified. She's a skeletal goddess. Anyway, she's made more ugly by time, I think.
Chamunda is also not like a very popular goddess, that
Right.
too. These two, Kali and Durga, are the more popular goddesses in Kolkata.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So one of the things that I wanted to foreground and ask you about before we move on to your current work is the fact that you are combining historical, textual, really literary study with field work or ethnography. And being an anthropologist myself, I'm really curious to know how you, or what strategies you use to do that on the ground work, you know, basically field work. Do you have specific methods you use, or when you say you interview people, do you have any particular techniques? And I ask this sort of in the interests of this being a class that you know, people, where one of the most practical things people have to think about is how they're actually going to do their research.
Well, I never took Courtney Bender's fieldworks class. I never had any formal training in doing ethnography. And, you know, I was told that religious studies scholars do text and context work. And you may be interested initially in a text, but you see how it functions on the ground. And so, you know, you can't possibly, there are people who have done sociological or anthropological studies in Kolkata, and they find one neighborhood or one, but I just, I spent a lot of time going to the same places and speaking to similar sorts of people. I don't have a good answer for you, Kathy. There's nothing about it that is systematic, except I guess I tried to be representative rather than systematic. So for the first book,
as would be true of most anthropologists, I think. Yeah. Did you hear what I said?
Yes, I'm glad to hear that, because one can feel slightly ashamed of one's methods if one can't say, you know, I followed such and such a theorist's methods. But
I was actually thinking more of, you know, when you meet somebody and you go to talk to them, how, you know, it's sort of, how do you go about it?
I don't record things. I take a notebook, a small one, and then at night I write it up on the computer. Yeah, a lot of time is spent rewriting and trying to figure out what I meant in these scrawls in my book.
Right. And then related to that, there's just one detail that I was curious, being a kind of psychoanalytically informed anthropologist and field worker myself, I was really curious about the fact that a young girl is worshipped as an embodiment of the goddess, and sort of what this experience is actually like for the young girl or for the family where that happens. And I'm just curious if you had any insights into that.
I never asked, I never talked with any of the Kumaris. So I don't have a good answer to that, but it is an honor. And it's not like the Nepali Kumaris, you know, she's not removed from her family. There's no other life that happens to her separately from her normal life. But it's a very heartwarming tradition, really, to think of the goddess being embodied in a girl. But, you know, it is, you know, she's not eligible once she has her period. So it has to be the purity of a young girl.
It must be an interesting experience for them. And I'm also curious about it because in doing this current research that I'm involved in on sex change surgery in Kolkata, there are a lot of stories I heard about young people who now are, you know, either cross-dressing or transgender in certain ways, talking about having had experiences of being dressed as a girl in a ritual or that kind of thing, and then that having an impact on their I mean, this is obviously a different situation, but having an actual impact on their self-experience and, you know, sort of at least as how they link up what they are now with, you know, with their past. So
that's fascinating. I want to read your book. I've never heard that.
Anyway, well, let's would you like to take a break for a minute before we move on?
If you guys would, I'm fine otherwise. Would you guys like a break?
This is always a difficult issue. Well, why don't we take a break for like 5 minutes, and then we'll be back at 11:10.
11:10. Excellent.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, I'm back.
Kathy, I'm going to start talking about Nazrul, but I don't have any slides for the Christian thing, but I really want to save some time for that. So I thought maybe of the last 45 minutes, if I spent 20 to 25 minutes on Nazrul and then the last 15 or so on the Christian stuff, would that be all right?
That's fine. Yeah.
So I
and
want,
do you mind the conversations, the
no, I
questions
think
kind of
it's great.
interspersed?
I
Like,
think it's great.
I think it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Less like a lecture and more.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. This has been an experiment, you know, how these things will go best, you know.
Well, by the time you do yours, you'll know exactly the right, the balance.
Inshallah, as they say.
Luckily, I can do that one. I left it blank, not thinking there was going to be a class, but now I'll be here.
Oh,
The
good.
next one
Good.
after this one is which one?
Let me go.
I can't come next
I get
week.
a little.
I think there isn't one next week, right?
Right. Right. I think there isn't.
And then I don't have any others written down. Are they? Oh, I have Anu on the 20th of November,
Right.
but I don't have anything in November other than that.
Well, so what's happening is that on November 6th, we were going to talk about the Muslim question. And I don't know that it's not listed because Zara M.Div was going to talk about her experience.
Oh.
And then people were reading. This is more for the smaller class, but you know, if she's okay with it, happy to open up. There are some issues I'm not sure she can actually do it. So we'll see what happens. And then Debashri Mukherjee we're having a book event in this same time slot for her new book, Bombay Hustle, on November 13th.
Got it.
And then Anu Rao is doing her masterclass on the
20th.
On November 20th.
And then there's Thanksgiving, and then I have Manakia.
Right.
And then
doing one on December 4th. I think
Okay.
it's useful to review for everybody. Yeah, and then as I've said, we are having some in the spring. So we have Gayatri Spivak lined up, and I have a few other people I will ask to see if people are interested, but I haven't started to do that yet. So.
Okay.
Looks like people aren't quite back yet. Let's just wait a second.
Hi, Nick. Hi, Quinn. Hi, Fran. Nick, I'm going to write to you today.
No rush.
This is great, Rachel.
It's,
I always love seeing your photographs.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're mostly back. So shall we begin again?
sure. Okay, I'm going to share the screen again.
I think some people signed out and are signing back in, so we have to readmit them. Okay.
Okay. The project I'm currently involved in is on this figure, Kazi Nazrul Islam, who is the national poet of Bangladesh and the rebel poet of India. And I got interested in him because when I was doing my work on the Kali poetry way back in the 80s and 90s, I discovered that perhaps, well, one of the best, if not the best, composer of poetry to Kali was this young man, this Muslim man, Kazi Nazrul Islam. And I was fascinated by that. And I thought, how is it that a Bengali Muslim can write such beautiful, beautiful poems and songs to the goddess? So I included some of them in the anthology that I published. And I believe I was one of the first people to include him. There are many, many anthologies, but usually they don't include him, even though people love his songs. But anyway, but then I thought to myself, well, if I'm still alive sometime from now, I'll study him, but I don't have time right now. I've got other things to do, like go watch animal sacrifice and work on this puja book. So but when that was finished, I decided to turn back to him. He's a very, very interesting figure, a composite figure in many ways. He was born in 1899 in Charulia, which is near Asansol in a western part of West Bengal. And he grew up and joined the 8th Bengal Regiment and, in World War I, and then came back and was really a poet by calling and by desire. And he married a Hindu woman here on the right, Pramila Sengupta. So he married a Brahmin, or actually she was anyway, a high caste Bengali woman. And they had a total of 4 children, only 2 of whom lived. So here he is with the second child, who unfortunately died, Bulbul, when he was 3.5. Here he is with his wife Pramila and the 2 boys who did live, who lived into their majority, and they died in their 40s, unfortunately. But he was a fascinating character. He lived most of his life in what is now West Bengal and wrote poetry that was, the poetry for which he's famous is anti-British poetry. He was writing in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, early 1940s, sort of scathing poetry against colonialism, against the British, but also against any sort of social injustice, against the treatment of low caste people, against the treatment of women, against any sort of ritual exclusion. You might say he's a modern day Kabir. He railed against both Hindu and Muslim exclusions, and he was loved and reviled by both communities, as you can imagine. This was Nazrul in the early 1940s. He was also a musician, and he wrote a lot of songs, and he wrote scores for films. He was a music teacher. He became not involved in politics because his views were too, they were anti-communal. So it was hard to draw him into a pro-Muslim platform, for instance. But he had a lot of prominent friends among Bengali intellectuals, Hindu and Muslim. Here he is engaged in a music lesson. And here he is seated with a number of Muslim friends. And here There was a Tarakeshwar temple incident where the Mahant, the priest, was found to be doing immoral activities. And a group of people got together and decided to fast in reaction to this Mahant. And you can see Nazrul here joined with them. This is not the Mahant, this is just one. So a lot of people, you can see the Gandhi spinning wheel, and you can see various of them with their sacred threads. But so he was no respecter of caste or of persons, and many people accepted him. He had something awful happen to him in his early 40s, because he was born in 1899. He had some sort of a mental break or collapse from about 1942 on, and he lived until 1976, but from 1943 on, he was unable to basically do anything. He couldn't remember, he couldn't think, he couldn't write. This was in the early 40s, which is just before the war. And, India was at war because Britain brought her in, and there was scarcity. That was the time of the Bengal famine. And he was not well looked after. His family tried to take him to a sanatorium. He didn't get better. He more or less languished. He was the breadwinner for the family. He had no money, and he was in a terrible state. And people eventually tried to raise money for him, but none of his friends was very wealthy. And anyway, he was more or less in this state by the time the Bangladesh War, or the war between East and West Pakistan, occurred. And in 1972, as a gesture of friendship between Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Indira Gandhi, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman asked whether Nazrul could come to Bangladesh and be there for a year. And this is what Nazrul looked like by then. And this is his daughter, one of his two daughters-in-law. She's still alive. I've spoken to her often about what it was like to be. These were his two sons, grown-up sons, and their children. And this is the Dakshineshwar Kali Temple, which showed that Nazrul, he refused to be pigeonholed as either a Muslim or a Hindu, and he was very Catholic with a small c in his own proclivities. This picture, by the way, is a scandal to some of the people in Bangladesh currently, who don't like to think of Nazrul's children and grandchildren as visiting a Kali temple. But in any case, this was the house, Christopher Street, that he was in when he got sick. This was a Kali image that was in his house to which he did puja. Again, a cause of some consternation. Here is him receiving a check from the government of East Pakistan before it became free. This is his son. Here is one of his sons, Kazi Nazrul, talking with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi about the transfer of Nazrul. And here is Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and the two sons and the daughter-in-law, Kalani Kazi. So here he is being taken to Bangladesh, arriving in Bangladesh. And he died in Bangladesh 4 years later, in 1976, at which point he was made the national poet of Bangladesh, and he was buried. And here is Zia Rahman, the current then Prime Minister of Bangladesh, praying over his body. And here is the grave site that one can visit today This is on the University of Dhaka University's campus. And there is a mosque over here to the left that you can't see, but this is Kazi Nazrul Islam's grave. That's the end of my. So one of the things, there are many things that I find fascinating about Nazrul and that I'm trying to do with Nazrul. I find it fascinating to find such a non-communal person who refused to be pigeonholed, although people tried to do so, and who was an unabashed admirer of elements of the Hindu tradition. When you think about this, when you think about how many people brought up in this country who were either Christian or Jewish, say, how many of them could write devotional hymns in the other tradition's idiom so beautifully that they would be taken for a group from the other group. I can hardly think of such a person, but he was able to do it, and I think partly the reason for that was the very mixed background of Bengal, meaning that Hindus and Muslims for some time, in a literary tradition, people have tried to bring them together. He grew up as a child in a Leto group, which was a singing group where people would sing songs and try to oust the other group by being able to retort more cleverly. And a lot of the themes were themes of Hindu mythology, etc., as well as all sorts of other themes. So he grew up with this vocabulary. But this sort of mixed person who was able to marry into the Hindu tradition, who had a tantric guru, no less, who had an image of Kali in his bedroom, and yet who spoke so passionately to Muslim youth about Muslim regeneration and Muslim uplift. And one of the things I find so interesting about him is the paths that he has traveled, or so to speak, that he has traveled between India and Bangladesh. Bangladesh views him very proudly as the national poet, and they view him as theirs. He lived there only for 4 years, although he would travel during his lifetime back and forth into parts of eastern Bengal. But he is slowly undergoing, I think, a process of Islamization in Bangladesh. I mean, at the moment, who knows what it will be like in 50 years, we don't know. And in India, he is known as a sort of secular icon, as a secular, although the Hindu right has tried to claim him also. He would have absolutely discountenanced both attempts to claim him, categorize him as either a Hindu or a Muslim. And so I've spent quite some time in Dhaka talking to people about what Nazrul means to them. I've talked to singers, I've talked to scholars, people in the Nazrul Institute. You know, each country has given him an honorary degree, has built an institute in his name, has named airports and train stations after him, and have produced beautiful coffee table books about him. And so there's a sort of it's not, wouldn't go so far as to say it's a rivalry, but there is a parallel stream of intention going on. And yet, what you find for sale in Calcutta or Kolkata are his Shamashandit, his beautiful hymns to Kali. What you find in the stores in Dhaka are recordings of his Islami Giti, the songs that he wrote to and about, Allah and Muhammad and various. So that's one thing. So it's a cross-border study. And I think it's so interesting to do such a study. I also find the pathos of his life. He's really a blank screen. After 1943, people say, oh, he wanted this or he would have wanted this. But everything we know about Nazrul up until the point he died was that he would not have wanted partition. He did not want communalism to reign. So it's ironic that he is the national poet of a country that came into being because of what he didn't want, partition. Now, we don't know how he would have felt in 1947 or how he would have felt in 1971. So I'm just saying that it's a interesting point to think about what happens to people, how people can be used when they're not there to correct or defend or agree with the usage. This is for me a much more sensitive topic to research than the Kali poetry or the puja material had been, because people care passionately about Nazrul Islam, and especially in Bangladesh, I have to be very careful what I report about what I hear. This is the sort of thing that many of you who have done research ethnographies must face. Somebody says, don't tell somebody this, or somebody defames somebody else, or somebody makes a comment and says, those West Bengalis, they don't understand anything. Or anyway, it's a difficult, one of the reasons I haven't published much about this is that I just don't know what to do about all of these things people have told me that I'm not supposed to say. One can make them anonymous, but it's quite clear if you get very deep into the details what one is reporting on or whom one is speaking about. And my husband keeps saying, don't publish anything if you want to keep going back until you're ready to finish not getting visas. Don't publish this. So I don't know. The other reason I haven't published much on it is because I don't have time to think about it, but I'm just too busy, but I will be able to get back to it. But it is something that that I feel very, very committed to as a subject, not just because, I've started it and I want to finish it, but because he's not well enough known, I think, in general introductions on India or on South Asia. And I think but really to do this project properly, I need to go to Pakistan. I need to, there was a period between 1947 and 1971 when he was a poet when we have the Pakistan, the east and west wing of Pakistan. And during that time, Pakistanis tried to make Nazrul equivalent to Iqbal. In other words, okay, we have Iqbal as our national poet on the west wing, and you in the east wing, you have Nazrul Islam. And there was a lot of scraping off of Nazrul's Hindu sides in that period. There was even an article published about the Obanchito, undesired elements in Nazrul that would have to go in order for him to stay as a national poet of Eastern Pakistan. So there's a lot of work to be done on this poet. Let me stop there for questions, and then I want to talk a little bit about the Diaspora Dalit project.
I'll begin, I guess, Rachel, with a question for you. I'm so fascinated by this character as a poet, right? Because of how important the poet's voice is. And I'm so curious about that voice and what his, not only his sort of performative career, if he had a performative career, I don't know what style of poet he is in that sense, but also whether there's you spoke about his illness as a sort of mental break, and I wonder if, are you characterizing that moment as when his voice sort of as a public figure is silenced, either of his own volition or because of other people pushing that sickness on him and denying him that voice?
Any discussion of what happened to Nazrul Islam is also very fraught. There are numerous explanations for what happened to him. But to answer his voice was stopped because he could no longer speak. He wasn't stopped from speaking, although many of his books during the British period were proscribed. They were banned because his books of poetry, because they were too clearly anti-colonial, anti-British. And some of them were not proscribed until after 1940, until after India became free. So in that sense, his voice was silenced. But there are many reasons why people say that he got sick. If you look in Wikipedia, it says that he had a particular disease. I forgot the name of it now. It's embarrassing. Anyway, a disease that makes the mind sort of cave in on itself. I have also been told that he was cursed by God for daring to speak so positively about Hindus and Hinduism. I've heard that the British poisoned him, a slow British poison that began in the 20s and fructified in the mid-40s. I've been told that he was hit on the head by a Hindu. He did have an altercation at some point, and that this might have caused a concussion that went. I've also been told that he had syphilis. The latter usually is whispered and quickly retracted as an explanation, because it's not a very nice thing to think that your national poet had syphilis. But in any case, there are many different reasons that have been put forward, and I myself am not particularly wedded to any one of them. But another thing that happened was that his wife became paralyzed from the waist down about a few years before he was struck. So the tragedy of that family, and his son dying of smallpox, his wife becoming paralyzed, he going mentally dead. It's just a very pathetic situation.
Okay, and so that's to say then that all of this decision making about where he would live for these last years of his life, or, you know, this is all sort of broader publics sort of moving him on their behalf, or, you know, okay.
They were political moves, although the family didn't mind him being moved to Bangladesh because it meant that they didn't have to pay for his upkeep. And then, you know, he had two sons who each had 3 children, and 3 of the children have now become Bangladeshi citizens, and 3 of them are Indian citizens. And one of the ones in Bangladesh, or 2, or maybe all of them, have converted to Islam, or not converted, they have stayed Muslims, whereas the ones in India have, you know, 2 of them have married Hindu women, etc. So even the grandchildren are slightly, there's a stretching, the differentiation.
Hi, Rachel.
Yeah, hi, Chris.
I was with this project, I was kind of curious. You talked about the some open questions in terms of how to handle the information that you do have with these kind of more broad questions. I was just going to ask more generally, at this point in the project, what are the questions you still feel like you want to get answered? Things that you're still kind of stumping you, or information about him that you told us so much that you do know about him. I'm curious at this point in the project, what questions still remain to be answered, figured out?
Some of it requires a little bit of archival work, as I mentioned about. I need to have a chapter on the Pakistan period, and I haven't started that. I've done a lot of work on translating work on Nazrul. I'm trying to prepare an anthology of his work. So a lot of what I need to do still is to read his work. 12 volumes of poetry. You know, it's not as bad as Tagore, not 50 volumes or Gandhi, you know, but still it's a lot of work to read all of that and to decide what is representative and what is interesting. And so those are big questions for me. And Quinn, you know, just how to frame this book. What am I going to argue? I mean, clearly he's a fascinating character, and I can show that, but I'm not really sure I mean, what really interests me is, as I say, the dual legacy of this man. And early on, one of the secondary sources I read in Bengali said that he was kondito, which means bifurcated or broken or cut up in two. And so that there are sort of two Nazruls who have now gone, one into each country. I think there's an element of that that's true, but also, I mean, there are lots of cross-border celebrations and discussions of him. But even if I do talk about him being kondito, it's very risky to claim these things. Because, I mean, to be absolutely frank with you, I have a stake. It's a personal stake. It doesn't matter to anyone in Nazrul remaining whole. And for him to remain whole, he cannot be made either a good Muslim or a good Hindu. He has to be always in this tension, has to be there. And, you know, there are some TV stations in Dhaka that won't allow their performers to perform anything that derives from the Hindu tradition. So I'm afraid of getting involved in all of that. So the big question for me is how do I present what, and how do I not be untrue to myself?
Thank you.
In other words, I don't want to cover things up for the sake of not being reviled. I want to be able to speak the truth, but about what I think. But maybe I should think things. I don't know. This problem has come to many people who have worked on ticklish subjects, and everybody finds a way out. And I will hopefully find one too. I wanted to spend the last few minutes. I don't have slides for the last few minutes, but I wanted to tell you about the project that I did in 2000, basically 7 to 10, on Dalit Christians in the diaspora. This project has had no further life. I'm not planning to do anything major with it because I don't have the languages for it. It was a project that I was commissioned to do, to write an essay on Indian Christians in the diaspora from the perspective of caste. It was for a book that was on Indian Christians in the diaspora. And it ranged from studies in Europe and the UK to the United States. And a friend of mine was editing it, and I looked at the table of contents and I said, you know, there's nothing about caste here. And he said, all right, you do it. It was basically like that. And so I was on sabbatical, supposedly doing something else, but I decided to take this up and went to Indian Christian churches in the tri-state area for most of a year and interviewed people, mainly pastors. I did not interview people in congregations unless the pastors or the ministers told me it would be all right. And this was a most incredible experience for me. I come from a Episcopal background, and I've spent my whole life studying the Hindu tradition, with which I feel a great affinity, for which I feel great empathy and some sympathy, and which feels almost hardwired in me. But I remain fundamentally a Christian. And to be able to study Christians, Indian Christians, it was a completely new experience for me. And it has changed forever the way I think about caste and the way I think about caste in India or caste in any other country. The stories that were told to me about people, what it used to be like, for instance, in the Cherry, in the untouchable neighborhood outside of a village in Tamil Nadu, the humiliations that people endured, even as Christians or prior to becoming Christians, and then again as Christians because there's caste in the church. Being told that the pain of untouchability is like a wounding of the soul, that there's an untold pain that you carry with you, that there is a shame, even though you don't know what you did to become an untouchable, but the shame of being an untouchable. And then coming to this country and finding caste again in this country. And the stories that people told me, of caste discrimination. And one of them said to me, when Indians travel, they bring their caste in their suitcase. And just this summer, this is not in my essay, but just this summer, what's going on in Cisco in California, a Dalit engineer was hired by Cisco and came to his job. And he was put into an all Indian group. And all of the Indians were middle-aged people who had come from India also, but ahead of him. And he endured great discrimination by them for being untouchable. And he complained to Cisco. And eventually it has come out into a court case that you can read about on the internet. And he said, which is exactly what my informant said in 2007-8, people don't ask you what your caste is. They find out your last name. They say, oh, you're from, where are you from? I'm from Chennai. What neighborhood are you from? They push you until you say something that gives away what you are or where you came from. Because most Dalit Christians won't say, I'm Dalit, they'll say, I'm Christian. But that in itself gives it away, because why don't you want to name your caste? You must be covering something up. And 75% of the church in India is Dalit. So you got a 3 out of 4 chance of being Dalit, except for the Kerala Christians who are mainly upper caste Christians. But so there is a court case going on, but it's extraordinary because California, and we don't have any statutes barring discrimination based on caste. We have almost everything else on the books you can imagine, right? Race, religion, sexual orientation, class, whatever, but we don't have caste yet. So it's going to be a very interesting case. But if you read what this man says about the way people would zero in on who he was, and he said that he was darker than they were, and all of these stereotypes. The two things that I would draw out from that essay that Kathy put up for you. One is that coming abroad gives great opportunity for people to escape from the caste system, or not escape from it, but have more freedom. Because of course, people in the US mainly are not thinking in terms of caste. They may think in terms of other things, but they're not thinking caste. And so some of the pastors that I interviewed chose to go to all Hispanic or all Black or all white churches where they were the only Indian family. So they would be the Indians rather than whatever the scheduled caste. Or they chose to go to all scheduled caste churches where they could lead a congregation and not worry about caste difference. The people who had the hardest time were pastors who were pastors of churches in which there were mixed congregates. So for instance, a church that ministered to Tamil-speaking people. And so you might have Bilalers, you might have Dalits of some sort and various other people. And a couple of the priests asked me not to mention to anyone in their church what they were telling me, that they were Dalit. And so I didn't. I made everything in the essay all anonymous. And one dear man, David Purushottam, one of the stories that touched me the most, when he first came to India, to the United States, sorry, he lived in New Jersey. There was going to be a Hindu temple put up in his neighborhood, and he argued strenuously against it. He even went to the city council. And the Hindus were there and they said, we want to build a nice temple here. And he said, how many people have you discriminated against? How many villages have you torched? I mean, he really, he went at them. And the judge was quite shocked. But he won. He helped to overturn that Hindu temple, which was not built in that area. 20 years later, a temple was built in Perth Amboy. And he was invited by the priests of that temple, the organizers, to come and bless the temple at its inauguration. And he didn't have a Christian last name, Purushottam. And so he said, have you mistaken me for someone else? And they said, no, we would like you to come. And he said, well, you know, I can only bless you in the name of Jesus Christ. And they said, that's what we want. And he came and he gave a blessing, and they seated him on a dais next to the Brahmin priest. And as he was telling me this, he stopped and his voice became almost a whisper. And he said, I could never have imagined this. Never have imagined in India that any Dalit would be put on a dais next to a Brahmin. But here in this country, or in the diaspora, feelings had melted to some degree. And I was very moved by that. On the other hand, and this is the last story I'll tell you, the man who, when I was asked to write this essay, I had a friend, a man named Gideon Jebamani, who is a Church of South India priest who now works in the jails here in New York as a chaplain. And he introduced me to a young woman who became one of my conversation partners. She had gone to medical school here, and the church had paid for her to go, and she was going to be a doctor. And she is very light-skinned, doesn't look like an untouchable, whatever that means. She can pass. And so she went to medical school, and she had lots of friends who, and she never told anybody what caste she was. She just said she was Christian. So she had friends who, to her shame and horror, used to make jokes about the obviously untouchable people there to her. And she didn't know what to do. And she felt that made her feel even more as though she had to keep her identity hidden within her. And she said something to me, which is at the end of the essay that is in that book. She said something that I always think about this. She said, if you take a group of people from India, Hindus, for instance, or anyone, and you bring them here and you let them settle down and they have kids and their kids have kids, etc., caste consciousness will slowly fade because it's not something that is, I mean, social class may not fade because that's what we have here, but caste may fade. But she said what keeps it going are all the waves of new immigrants who keep bringing caste in their suitcase. And she said this is especially true if you happen to live in places, in cities that are little Indias or, you know, Jackson Heights or places like this, where caste is very important. You know, you have the stores for weddings, you have matrimonials, you have what that are sometimes based on caste. And she said that she despaired of people ever really losing caste consciousness here in this country. So now when I teach, I'll say one more thing. The other really astounding thing that happened to me through this research was that I had a whole new perspective on missionaries. It's almost impossible to be a teacher of South Asia in this country and not malign the missionaries. Nobody wants to be converted, right? The fact that those of us who are Christians were some way back in the dim ages converted by someone in the medieval, who knows? But anyway, we don't like to think about conversion and we make a stand against it. But these people again and again said to me, thank God for the missionaries. They named their towns after them. They took the names of their, they took Christian names. They said the missionaries gave us education. They gave us healthcare. They gave us a space to be, because we were always pushed to the outside of villages. So I stopped maligning missionaries in my mind. I still don't want to be missionized, and I still would not missionize myself, but that doesn't mean that I can't look at it differently now from a different perspective. Anyway, I'm sorry I talked so long, but this is the project that, like the Nazrul project, both of them really touch me deeply.
Okay, we've got like 9 minutes left. I'm speaking on behalf of Kathy as a surrogate moderator because of technical problems, but like we've got 9 minutes for questions, so jump in if you have them.
I just have a quick question regarding Nazrul's work and kind of what you were saying about how it's so hard to categorize him as a good Hindu or a good Muslim. Maybe I was just thinking in terms of the development of the Bengali identity politically in West Bengal and also in Bangladesh, right? Of Bangladeshiness versus Bengaliness. That maybe that could be the analytic to kind of mediate that dissonance between kind of claiming him as one or the other, because I think his inclusion as the national poet of Bangladesh is tied to like Bangladeshiness to some extent. So I think maybe then that would maybe move out of kind of this binary construction, and maybe would make analysis maybe could move it in some new directions because he is so difficult to categorize. But I was just thinking that I've just been learning about that recently. So,
So in other words, the new way you're thinking of would be to make it Bangladesh versus West Bengal?
Yeah, like Bengaliness versus the creation of like the Bangladeshiness, a Bangladeshi identity, right, based in Islam. Because it was Bengaliness has always been like the key issue that has then been transformed under like, General Zia and stuff. So, and Ershad in Bangladesh. So yeah, I think that could be interesting because it's really interesting that they don't, in Dhaka, what you're saying, that they don't allow Hindu songs, anything referencing Hindu gods.
It's not quite true. The one thing that would make me nervous about, there are people in Bangladesh, of course, who are secular and who love his Hindu songs, but
those key networks,
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I would have to be careful not to overgeneralize on either side, right? Because another big thing that I need to explore more is what Nazrul means to West Bengali Muslims. I've started that project, but that I need to do more of that. So you're right. I expand the book.
Yeah, it's just so interesting that that he's named the national poet of Bangladesh when there's like the rise of a more kind of conservative Islam in Bangladesh recently. So yeah, I was just thinking that, but it's really interesting work. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rishi. Thank you.
Hi, Rachel.
Quinn.
I've often joked that my advisor is my muse, but now Kathy's literally going to speak through me. She's frozen. She asked, will you turn this into a major project? This being the Dalit Christian project. The essay. Will you turn it into a major project?
I don't think so, Quinn, Kathy, because I need to, unless I do it among Bengalis, I need to learn Tamil or I feel as though I shouldn't undertake something when I can't speak the language, even of the people in the diaspora. That doesn't seem right to me. And Bengal is not the place where most of these stories come out of. They come out of, there are people from all over, but particularly South India. I would like to do that, Kathy, but I don't know how to do it without knowing more languages, and I don't really have the time in life. Somebody else can do it.
Hi, Professor. I was wondering if you had the time to explore music schools, classical music schools in Kolkata, because that's where I was introduced to Nazrul Islam as an upper caste Hindu woman. And I think that's important to note in today's India. It could be interesting to sort of locate Nazrul Islam in the singing schools, because that's where I first heard him. I live on Nazrul Islam Avenue in Kolkata. And I'm not sure how long Kazi Nazrul Islam will be an important part of Bengal if BJP does come to power at some point in the next 2 elections or so, and what India will look and how India will look at Islamic figures. But yeah, he's definitely been secularized. I just wanted to point out that the singing schools could be a good departure.
Thank you for that. Very kind of you, Anuja. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
The last thing I will say before we stop is that find topics that touch you, that move you in some way when you're thinking about what to study, because that will take you a long way.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thank you.
If there are last questions, feel free to interrupt me, but otherwise, thanks all for being here, and thanks, Rachel, for sharing so much of your research work with us. It's been wonderful.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Kathy, even if you are frozen. You look as though you're thinking about something. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you. This was great, Rachel.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I think the next meeting is on November 20th. If you're curious, keep your eye on the email for updates otherwise. Take care.
Thank you.
You.